This episode is the second part of our conversation with Patrick O'Mahony, this time all about their ambitious project Sea Monster in Weston-Super-Mare, one of the greatest pieces of industrial theatre that I have ever seen. It's a wonderful example of British creativity.
So Patrick, you're the founder of NEWSUBSTANCE. We first came across each other when you did the amazing Swarm drone Jubilee celebrations above Buckingham Palace with the corgis, which was just incredible. And then more research later, I found you employed 50 people in Leeds, and I just thought this really is the future of jobs and the future of working. And then we spoke and you said, you've got to come and see one of our latest installations, which is here behind us, the Sea Monster.
Yeah.
And I've been around it this morning and just completely bowled away by how something like this gets put together. I mean, as with all things, perhaps best to start at the beginning, and you can explain in your words a bit about what the project is about in terms of Sea Monster and how it came to be.
Yeah, it's it's quite an undertaking, to say the least. I think the toughest project we've ever taken on. It was such a pure idea to start with, but then the delivery of it was like nothing we could ever imagine. So in terms of how it came about, we were commissioned. So it's a UK government commissioned Unboxed Creativity in the UK. We were one of 10 big commissions across the UK in 2022. We assembled a team cross-sector from science, technology, engineering, maths and art. So people we'd never worked with before. That was the whole premise to the commission. You had to work with cross-sector and people that you never worked with before, which was, I suppose, very different to terms of how arts and entertainment normally work. We work within our circles and we use everyone we've always used before, and you design in a very usual process, whereas this was much more about how do you start that conversation with a group of individuals not from those backgrounds, and then how do you create big, ambitious, inclusive projects? So we got this group of people together. We were in the height of COVID, so creativity over Zoom, some great politeness, so everyone's all very uncomfortable and trying to design, and those people never designed on this kind of scale before, so it's very, very difficult to start with. But nice at the same time because it was quiet. I mean, entertainment was not busy during COVID. So got this amazing group of people. And what came forward from that was, I suppose it was more stories that people wanted to tell. That's how people could articulate their vision better than going, let's do an oil rig. The rig came much further down the line in terms of that process. It was much more, people were really keen to, if we're going to get a commission this size, let's reuse something that exists. Let's not build new. We're very we're always inclined to build new shiny things and tear down the past instead of preserve it or reimagine it. In this case, we took something which has had a life over here as one defined use, and we've turned it into something very different. Renewable energy, what's that conversation look like about the future of energy creation, and more playfully, the great British weather, part of our cultural identity, part of who we are. We always smile about it, we complain about it. Wherever we go in the world, we talk about it. How would you bring all those, wrestle them together? And by pure chance, I found we were originally looking at old forts off the coast of the UK, like abandoned big industrial structures. And that through a sequence of conversations, we found these graveyards of rigs up in Scotland and all around the world, these things, these monsters of the sea, that's the name, that have this life and then have to go through this huge decommissioning process. And we, I suppose, posed the innocent question at the time, what happens if we could get one of these and we could reimagine it? And then that was like pushing the domino, basically. We couldn't get past that idea. And I really thought, I suppose, when we first hit across the idea, everyone got really excited. I thought it's going to get shot down. There's, and I'm a pretty ambitious and optimistic person. I thought there is no way we're going to get hold of a structure that big out of an industry like that and be able to take it in the timeline we had, because we were awarded, we won this commission in like February last year. To be then here where we are today is quite a short timeline. but spoke to some guys in Scotland who move rigs. Basically, is how it started. Some very dour guys rang them up out of the blue and said to them, "Do you reckon we can get hold of a rig? We want to do an art project with one." There were a lot of expletives kind of later, but with good humour to it, and I won't do the accent. And they were like, "I suppose you could do, but no one's ever wanted to do that before. Why would you want to do it?" I was like, "Don't worry about why we'd want to do it.
Yeah.
Do you reckon you could get us one?" And that's where it started. They unlocked doors, conversations, and everyone started saying yes. People were like, "Well, it would be amazing if you could do this. Why would you want to do it?" And you showed them the ambition of what we tried to do. Everyone just kind of lined up behind us, and then it before you knew it, we had a rigging principle, and it kind of went from there.
And how, just going back a step, that creative process, like, how do you guys do that? I mean, we talked in the previous episode about loads of the amazing things and festivals and events you've done, but what sparks that kind of creative process? What was the kind of request for proposal like from Unboxed?
Yeah, so the Unboxed was, bold and ambitious, basically. They wanted to reach 66 million people. They wanted to inspire a new generation, showcase creativity in the UK. What I also liked about it, I suppose, it was framed as an experiment in creativity. So it gave you that freedom to think and to go, well, what hasn't been done before? What could we do? And I think it's always hard, when people say, where did you get the idea for X, Y, and Z from? There's never a clear route to the idea, and it was almost quite, this time I found it very stressful in the sense that we had this amazing group of people, from the British Antarctic Survey to Rocket Women to Dose of Society to Ivan Black, like some really high caliber people, and we were forming all these ideas, but they're almost looking to us to provide the platform to shape that into what the big moment was. And then you start to feel that kind of creative pressure. It's almost like writer's block in that sense of, well, what is that big idea? What are we going to come up with which will win? And I'm never sat at the desk, in front of my computer when it comes up. It's always in the most random of places. In this case, I was locked down in a hotel in the Middle East on another show. I remember I was in a hotel, literally confined to a room for 7 days, going stark raving mad. And then by pure chance, the idea popped into my head. I remember seeing a picture of one of these rigs, and that was the unlock, basically.
I think it's so interesting. I think creativity, like when we try and do sessions with the podcast, either comes like best at the beginning of the day or actually at the end of the day when people are really tired, like, because then they sort of look for shortcuts, like, and actually that can kind of work really well in a way, I think. And it's interesting, that kind of like process and how you kind of make it happen, particularly given the amount that you have done on it. And it's one of these misnomers slightly, I think, about entrepreneurship and creativity is the sort of light bulb moment, and actually it's never like that. I always talk about it being one of those old sort of strobe lights. It takes a few times to kind of
100%. Because I also think you don't believe. So when I first thought about it, it wasn't like a big eureka moment. It wasn't like that. That's it. That's absolutely nailed on. It was like, oh, okay, yeah, that could be quite interesting. Then you start to sketch it up, and it looks a bit better. And then you start to soundboard it off a few people, and they're a bit like, yeah, and I suppose it gathers, the more then it develops as an idea, the more support you get, the better the visuals start to build on. Then you start to realize, that is actually that's the one, that's what we should do. Very rarely do I think, you see it straight away. I remember when we did Coachella for the first time, what became Spectre, which is our installation there, was I think the fourth idea in the deck that we put together of the creative content. It wasn't our favorite idea. It was number 4 in the entire proposal deck, but then it was like the outside horse. It started to gather pace the more we looked at it, the more we did with it, and before we knew it, we're like, oh, actually, that's the one we should be going for, and that's the one we did there as well.
Amazing. And so what happens to these rigs platforms when they're, what normally is the process that they go through to be decommissioned?
Normally they're cut out of removed out of the sea and then recycled, scrapped basically. And that was the interesting thing. People have been looked at reuse for a long time now. So there's like a pyramid of kind of what should happen or what is proposed to happen, and reuse sits at the very top because it's such a long process, normally like 5 to 6 years in terms of planning for these things. No one's ever cracked it before or had the reason to crack it for, especially for arts and culture. There aren't the opportunities, I suppose, to kind of go, oh, wouldn't it be amazing if we did a huge art installation like this? So, for us to sit there and kind of go, we would like to do this, the support we then got, but also what we had to do to get hold of the rig, it was incredibly hard in terms of, the paperwork didn't exist for us to do what we wanted to do with it. And I think that's the power of, I suppose that entrepreneurial approach, that arts and culture, because we were just like, if we'd known at the start of it what would it take to get here, would we have gone forward with it? Probably not. But I think that's that wonderful kind of sense of creativity and journey ambition at the start, where you kind of go, right, whatever it needs now, we're going to do this. And we kept driving it forward. But in that process, created a little blueprint, I suppose, for how this can be done. So, we've already had people in last week from the States who want us to look at a project out there using one. We've got people from the Middle East coming in next week, because like our little flare's gone up now across the world to kind of go, well, they've done this with this one here, although very small. And now people commit to us, oh, we would like to do a bird sanctuary on here. We'd like to do a gallery underwater on the legs. And they want to learn from what we've done. And that's the amazing kind of ripple effect that we're now starting to see.
So how do you move it from Scotland to Weston-Super-Mare?
This was in the Netherlands, this one. So it got cut out of the North Sea, went to Netherlands to be cleaned. So all the nasty stripped out of it. And then we were going to cut it up and move it by truck originally. But some amazing Dutch people were like, you can sail this in. And we're like, we're in Weston-Super-Mare with like the biggest tidal range in the UK. You've got about that much water at high tide. And they were like, no, we can do this. So it became an amazing part of the project, because the sense of industrial theatre that then came. So we lift it as an entire structure. So the framework, without all the creative overlay on it, was lifted onto a barge the size of a football pitch. And then there was one day in each month where we could get into Weston where the tide was the highest, where it came right up to the back of the trop. And then
one day a month.
So you had a sailing window, and then you also had permit land over here where everyone's trying to work out how on earth they're going to allow you to move this between the Netherlands and the UK. It's classed as waste, like a whole world of pain over there. So, 5 o'clock in the morning, the barge arrived. We beached it on the beach, 2 big sea anchors holding it in position, and then what we call multi-axle movers. So these things that you see on the Discovery Channel that move entire buildings, drove down the beach. We pulled the rig across onto it. It drove back up the beach, and then a single crane, one of the biggest ones in the UK, lifted it as a single structure onto its brand new legs. It was amazing, but equally terrifying 3-4 days of my life.
I can imagine. And the crane to put it together, like, how big was that?
It is enormous. So literally there's 3 of them in the country, and it was enormous, like 250-ton crane, basically.
Wow.
Lifted it as a single unit. So the entire top side of the rig that you can see there, lifted up on a single hook, off the movers and onto its brand new legs. It was a tough watch.
I can imagine. I love the phrase you used earlier, industrial theatre.
Yeah, very much so. We had crowds of thousands out for 3 days, because it was like this invasion almost. It was like so otherworldly, I suppose. A, to see a structure like this up close. B, it arrive out of nowhere onto the beach, and then the size of the machinery that was then involved with it. For me, it was part of our whole installation. So that was like chapter 1, the arrival, was part of the entire theatre of the whole project of Sea Monster.
And how do you go about costing something like this at the beginning, right? Because it just must be so difficult to know how to do. And there must be so many, known unknowns, unknown unknowns. It just must be enormous trying to scope something like this.
It's not straightforward. I suppose we had to break it down into sections of the project. So we knew that we could get the rig. So we knew we had our base structure.
Yeah.
We then worked with a company called Mammut who move huge things all the time. So they were very clear about what it would cost to move from A to B. So those bits were known. And then weirdly, stage 3 in effect is making it look like it does now. Yeah. So the new legs, the garden, the amphitheatre, the slide, which is much more common, I suppose, to our world. So we know what we're doing there, and an operations team on top of that. So whilst
that was the easy bit,
repurposing it, putting the trees on it and everything else is the least stressful of all of it. Doing it in the time we had was, an 8-week turnaround on the fit out was less fun because it was so tight. But I suppose whilst it's crazy on one level and so mind-blowingly big, it follows a certain set of principles that we do with all of our projects. And where we had unusual gaps, like giant barges 90 meters wide and all that, we had specialists that came in. Same with the engineers that came in from the very beginning. So we could almost take it into bite-sized pieces with healthy, contingencies for unknowns along the way.
And what's talk to us about different jobs? I mean, you've alluded to some of them there, but the different jobs involved in putting something like this together.
Yeah, so I think this is the broadest of all the shows we've ever done. And that argument, of this is very much where creativity had to run across every single department, because we couldn't have any conventional thinkers on the project. We had to have creative thinkers in every possible department, or else we just couldn't work with them. And along the way, had to get rid of quite a few people who couldn't follow the ambition and the dream. And I'll come back to that, especially in terms of renewable energy. So, in terms of who we had on this, we had myself driving the creative vision, I suppose. I would like it to look like this. Very simple, that part of it. You then have a huge engineering team. So we have in-house engineers, Mike Birch, who led from our side, but then we had Atelier One, who did Gardens by the Bay in Singapore and Nish Kapoor's Bean. So really clever, creative engineers who most people wouldn't take on something like this. You don't know what that rig is, the life it's lived for 25 years in the North Sea, and we want to now do a very different job by having walkways on it and trees and gardens. So a very, very big engineering team, which spread across the structure itself, but Mammut, who brought it here. You then have the fabrication team, multiple fabricators from all around the world, from waterfalls that we've got on it, to the pool, to the kinetics, to the big sculptures on there. So you kind of got that fit out and overlay team. We then have a huge education and outreach, in terms of that conversation about what we're trying to talk about with the sea monster. So it just keeps kind of getting bigger and bigger. You kind of undo the onion. You're like, there's a creative idea here, but then you've got the engineering to do it. You've got to make it. You've got to deliver it. You've got to operate it. You've got to talk about it. You've got to educate with it. So it kind of goes out like this. But at every step of the way, I suppose we're always striving to find people that could go on that journey with us. The renewables on there was a small part of the story to start with, but it became much, much bigger because we had these consultants to start with who wrote these wonderfully big reports for us about the future of renewable energy. And we said to them, we want to experiment with this rig. It's not necessarily about creating the most amount of energy. It's about what happens when art and design start to intersect that space. What happens when the artists get hold of the solar panels and the wind turbines? And to start with, they were like, absolutely. They came to us with a report. And the suggestion for the wind turbine was a big white wind turbine. And the suggestion on solar was big sheets of solar that we could put around the outside of the sea monster. And I was like, that is not, that's not going to work. Yeah. That's not the point of the brief. And in this meeting, we were there, the lead consultant said to me, yeah, but the problem is if artists get involved in the engineering and the design process, it becomes too expensive and becomes impractical. I was like, okay, tell me some more about that. And his example then was a chair. He said to me, if an artist designs a chair, it becomes very expensive, it becomes very uncomfortable. I was like, I think we are fundamentally at opposing ends of the spectrum here. So we consciously uncoupled from that consultant and found some amazing people in the States called Land Art Generator, who are out of Burning Man, who have been running sustainable design competitions for like 20 years. And I was like, right, who is out there right now like that is reimagining this space? Like how can renewable energy be part of placemaking for cities and for schools and everything else? You need to design something which is creatively informed, so you could produce it and put it in these places and it look amazing. So they brought us an artist called Trevor Lee, who'd been trying to make the wind nest for like 6 years, which is the wind turbines you see up there. And then we internally designed the solar tree, which is the big structural form with all the solar on top of it. Because we wanted to provoke the conversation of a sculptural form, which then starts to inform the technology. And our system up there now powers the whole of the garden that's up there, all the irrigation system and everything else. Because we wanted to see what happens when that space starts to change the conversation. Yes, right now there are some very efficient solutions out there, but are they going to be across the entires of cities? Probably not. That's why they live on the outskirts in farmland and everything else, where you can do it on scale and it's less invasive. What happens if you could have a boulevard of solar trees or wind nests within a city centre and that powers that street? It's starting to pick at the sides of that. And the whole point of this project was that cross-sector collaboration to understand what that space could look like.
And one of the things that I think is a slight shame about this is that it won't be here forever, or it's it's a short period of time. Where do you think the future of sustainability and the long-term aspect of design and creative design sits?
I think it's, I suppose that's what we wanted to do with this project. It's like, we are here for a short time. We're a short commission in that sense. But I suppose what we're trying to eyeball is what comes after this. And I think, and the whole point is that cross-sector collaboration. Industries work within industries, don't they? Like, you know your industry, we know our industry, and you work in those channels over here. But what we did find, I suppose, through this project is when you do start to cross the streams, like, the conversations do start to change a lot. So we'd have never done something like this without those different minds from different areas looking at the same time. In terms of renewables, I do hope there is more scope for that conversation of design in that space, because I think it's then a lot more accessible. It's a lot more achievable. It's like, what Apple did to the phone in that sense. It was a functional device before that. Apple came along, transformed everything, turned it into a desirable brand. Everything else, if you can interject that art and design piece, I think it can very much change that three road of what things can look like, and then the adoption of it on a mass scale.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can see that. And how supportive have I understand the local council have been pretty supportive of this. How big of a difference did that make? Because I understand it was a old Lido that hasn't been used for many decades.
Yeah. I suppose, one of the benefits on this project is we had very good partners in terms of Unboxed, in terms of the government, in terms of North Somerset Council. We were already doing something quite prickly, bringing an old platform like this and putting it on a beach. So we needed people who were with us from the very beginning. We couldn't just go anywhere and do this. We needed that ambition to be leveled with what we were trying to do. And they were great from the very beginning. The Lido's sat here, and it's been great. It's had events here and has a thriving kind of trade in terms of what it is. But I suppose we came along, Dismaland was here with Banksy a few years ago. That set an ambition bar quite high. And this was like the next step. So they were like, this would be an amazing parallel for us now to move further. The old Lido was like its old heritage, is that British seaside moment, to bring something so different like this to it, provided that next phase in its life. But also, I think, when we first approached them, they were very keen, like, bring it here, lots of attention, lots of investment, great. But, we had a rocky road in terms of getting it here. And in terms of, we're doing something first time in the world that sadly there's no user manual. And when things get hard, there's no one you can call. And that's when if people are really with you. And we were delayed in terms of getting in here to start with, but they were with us every step of the way. Same with Unboxed as well. Everyone rallied around and were like, this has to happen. We have to it's so important to make this happen right now. Everyone very much stood by us, and that's what got us through, and that's what got us here, really.
So inspiring conversations about climate. Inspiring conversations about the climate and so on. It almost seems counterintuitive to have an oil rig, but that adds to it in so many ways. What else have you done to kind of use this as a hub to have those conversations?
Yeah, so, we've got a huge outreach scheme. So in terms of locally here, in terms of, I think we've had 55,000 school children engaged with the project, big national assembly we did on it. I suppose what we're trying to do as well is tell that story in a positive way. The whole point of the Sea Monster was that it's a big ambition. You come here and you can't not be amazed by it. Whether you like it, whether you don't like it, that's fine. But you can't not have an opinion on it. Yeah. And I think that was part of the point. We wanted to do something really big, really ambitious, really playful. We have a slide on there. We have the cloud portal where you can get wet. We have the big waterfall. We wanted to frame that conversation in very much a forward-looking way. Everyone... the rigs, everyone's been part of that whole process. They live offshore, you never see them. They're huge feats of engineering in themselves, but they've all contributed to where we are today. But now there's that moment in time where you can kind of go, right, that's got us where we are now. How do we propel forward? It's why we have that conversation about renewables on there. It's why we've got the big schools program, the university program, and things like where we are today, the studio. We've got lots of broadcasters who've come through the space to again frame that conversation about kind of future use, reuse, renewables, and what that can look like. So I think we all hear about it. There's lots of obviously active conversation about where we are kind of globally, climate-wise. But I think when you can frame it with something like this, when you have like a big physical item to frame that conversation, it's far easier to have that conversation with people and frame where that could go.
It makes it so much more real as well, right? I think that's what's, the industrial theatre, the art point about this stuff. Like really sticks home, because I think it's one of the things that we really is a challenge in the modern world, is sometimes people don't see the kind of consequence of their actions as much. And yeah, it's really inspiring to sort of see it here and see what you've done with it. Where did the idea for the waterfall come from?
The waterfalls, literally, I think, has been there almost since day one. We wanted to, with the sea monster, we wanted to make sure it had that sense of personality to it. So the waterfall was always the roar of the sea monster. It was like that tonal description of what it was. It had that sense of play to it. We knew we'd get a huge amount of drift on it, that kids would then play and jump in the water. Everyone likes getting wet. It's like jumping in puddles, isn't it? So it was that playful note, but it's very much that audio signature as you move throughout the structure, from the roar at the basement, the scales that we have on it, the kinetic, which has the lovely little sound to it, right up to the top when you're in the amphitheatre. We wanted to make sure as you move through, each level had like a different experience to it.
Yeah, no, when you said jumping in puddles there, for the rest of your answer, I just had the concept of I just had the Peppa Pig jumping in muddy puddles, splish, splash, splosh running in my head.
It's a well-trodden path.
yeah, exactly. We've all been through it. What's the kind of future for pop-up installations? Because we've talked a bit about how it's again a lot easier to do these things, but it's amazing the kind of scope of work you've taken on to sort of move an oil rig, to ship it across seas and continents. Like, what is the future of pop-up installations? What other exciting things are you working on?
I think it's a really interesting space, especially in that post-COVID world. I think the physicality of placemaking with things like this, be it in towns or cities, or be it big moments like the World Expo, where people physically contribute to that moment, I think it really has that sense of community to it. So what we've done here is reimagine a site which was disused for many years in a iconic British seaside town. It's free, and we're seeing between 4,000 and 8,000 people a day coming through the space. It's kind of it's not just locally either. It's kind of, we're going nationally, internationally, people coming in to see it. And I suppose that's what these physical structures can do. It kind of goes back to that conversation about people always call it about digital versus physical, but I think whilst the digital world has accelerated massively in that post-COVID world, I think the physicality of big installations drives reactions. It drives people to experience it in the first sense, and I don't think you'll ever get away from that, because having a physical reaction to something with a shared experience, I think, is still more powerful than anything else.
Yeah, we talked a bit about in the first episode in terms of the more artsy projects that you're doing, that people want the sort of social media Instagrammable thing behind it. I mean, it is fascinating. You have built an entire media hub here. Like, it's pretty incredible that now, again, that's not that difficult to do. How much do you think the sort of future of that kind of we talk about the experience economy growing, but one of the things that I think is interesting about the experience economy is that the difference with it, with social media, is that they can now be captured forever. So it sort of becomes a product and a thing and a material in itself that you put online and can kind of look back on. And I just love your thoughts on that. I
think it's also, you have much more instantaneous feedback as well. That's the other different thing. Previously you had you design a piece or an installation or an event or a moment, and it was reviewed by a select group of people, and that was your feedback. Now, from the second we launched this, we had instant feedback, good and bad, in terms of what we were doing, why we're doing it. Everybody who comes through here captures it, shares it. So you get to see your own work from a totally different point of view. I always find it really interesting. You've designed this, and we designed this for 1.5 years in advance, with a very clear route of how we thought people would experience it, move through it. As soon as we open the doors, everyone treats it totally differently. And it's never how you've originally designed it, how people respond to it. But I think that's the beauty of where we're heading with the experience economy. The feedback is more varied and more instantaneous, so you know what works, what doesn't work. Also, in terms of people's expectation and hunger for it, they're very used to previously going to a theatre, sitting in a seat for 90 minutes with an interval. It's there, they go home. Whereas now they have the freedom to explore. The scope of the immersive and the experience economy now is so vast, and people want more. They want to be included in it as part of the theatre. They want to be able to curate their own journey through it. Then they create their own content. So they're creating their own experience through your product. It may be not how you intended it to be, but you're giving them more now. I think that you're giving them a platform more for the experience. So people coming in here and make their own journey. We were very clear that we won't put any signposts, that we won't educate people about trying to force our narrative on our audience. We'll let people go around here and interpret it how they want to in terms of what we're trying to do here. And then we see that now in terms of how that gets amplified, people telling their own stories about how they see Sim Monster and how that's influenced them as well.
Yeah, I think that sort of, I mean, I guess you don't do this as much, but the character development of things and becoming much more deeper ingrained, coming at it from the podcast world as you'd expect me to. But it is interesting how you're getting more kind of like podcast spin-offs of shows and stuff because people want yet deeper and deeper experiences of some things. Some people just want to watch the show or whatever. But yeah, I think that's...
We've got the same here as well. We have people, who come through, just move the experience. They're in and out in maybe 20 minutes. We have other people who've been here for like half a day, sat on the amphitheatre at the top. We have hosts as well, which is the big driver here. So people who can animate and advocate the space. So if you want to find more about, what's going on each level, you can talk to those people. It's not a recorded message. It's not a plaque. It's a real human there that's been on the journey creatively with us and knows about the project. And I think that's the nice thing about experiences like this and more in that experience economy. You can make of that what you want. It can be a short, sharp 20-minute experience, or you can really dive in and get into the detail over a number of hours with it.
Yeah. No, I think it's fascinating. One final question.
Yeah.
Who's the most interesting entrepreneur that you've come across that we should interview potentially for the show? Our Pass the Mic show.
So I think you may be actually interviewing him. So for me, and it's not, there's obviously all the big ones like, your Stephen Bartlett's, your Elon Musk, all those which are great and inspiring, but Amit Patel, who's been on this project with us, who lost his sight a number of years ago, he worked with us on accessible design. He's the single most incredible person that I've ever come across because he sees the view literally from a totally different viewpoint, but has such an inspirational and can articulate it far better than anyone else in terms of his journey that he's been on, in terms of from where he was career-wise and where he is now. 100% you should speak to him.
Brilliant. Well, we'll get him on the show soon. Patrick, thanks so much for coming on Jimmy's Jobs of the Future. It's been brilliant
Fantastic.
to have you twice.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks for listening to Jimmy's Jobs. One of the ways we make this show possible is through our various partnerships. If you'd like to partner with us, you'd be joining one of the UK's fastest growing business podcasts, reaching over 40,000 listeners every month. We've helped a wide variety of groups tell their story, from the National Farmers Union right through to the FinTech Alliance. So if you'd like to work with us, just go to www.jobsofthefuture.co. To keep up to date with all Jobs of the Future news, you can follow us across all social media, including our brand new TikTok and YouTube channels.